In this video, I'm going to share my most secret, most effective tools and techniques that I use to name a business, a product, a newsletter, a proprietary process, anything that needs to be named in your brand. The most popular video on this channel at the time of this recording has been my naming video, and I recorded it years ago. And it still has really great content in it. It tells you the criteria that your brand name should have. It gives you some quick tips, but I really wanted to create a follow-up video that dives deep into a technique or tools that you can use to actually name your brand and your business. So I'm going to bring you behind the scenes on my laptop here and have you walk through some of the tools that I use most often for myself and for my clients and students to name things in our brands. One caveat before we dive in, I just want to acknowledge that naming, even for me, who has a bunch of tools that I'm about to share with you, is one of the most difficult things in starting a business. It is just hard. When you come up with the perfect name, you Google it and then you realize that somebody else has already used it, or maybe like several somebodies are already using it. And depending on what you're using the name for, that might and probably will be a hard stop, right? You're not gonna build your brand on somebody else's land or somebody else's territory. You need to come up with your own unique name. Product names, those kinds of things aren't quite as much of a big deal as like the actual brand name, but even so, you don't want anybody in your industry, any close competitors, to be using the same name. You want to find something that's unique for your industry. So I hope that the tools that I'm about to share you will help you land on the perfect name for whatever you're naming. If we haven't met before, my name is Kaye Putnam. I'm the psychology-driven brand strategist. I help entrepreneurs change the world with what they know and to share their genius online so they attract their perfect clients. And when you're building a brand, one of the best things that you can do is to name your brand assets. So it's clear that they are specific and unique to your brand and they become part of the intellectual property of your brand. Let's get into the tools that I use when I'm naming for businesses. All right, so the first thing that I am going to share with you is the spreadsheet that I use to do a massive brain dump so that I can get all of my ideas, good and bad, out of my brain. And it's the place where I collect all of the different combinations, all of the different words that I think could be potential candidates for part of my name. So let me explain quickly the different columns that I use in this spreadsheet, and then I will also link the spreadsheet up in the description of this training. And if you want a more in-depth training on not only how to name your brand, but how to build every other aspect of it, I'm going to invite you to check out my brand new brand program. It is my signature process for building a brand from scratch, from A to Z. Naming is a crucial piece of it. You're getting it for free here. But if you want the in-depth version and more detail on everything else, you definitely want to join the BNB fam. Okay, so the product is like, what are you actually selling? Is it a course? Is it a program, a mentorship, a newsletter? What is it? Like, what is the thing? And then second, who are you as a human or as a brand? Are you a strategist? Are you a consultant? Are you an e-commerce store? Are you, what are you? In all of the different ways that you can describe it. And then what is the actual process or the experience that people have with your product or service? There's some examples underneath here. So like my process is all rooted in psychology. So that's an important word for me. Like I said, with my brand new brand program, it's a step-by-step program. So step-by-step is the process. It's a lot about chiseling away what you aren't so that we can arrive at what's true for you and your brand. So it's like excavating or distilling to figure out what your brand is. And it's also curation. So you're going out, you're finding all of this different inspiration, seeing what resonates with you and what fits, what's in alignment with your true message. So that's part of the process as well. And then This one is probably one of the most important brainstorming columns to fill out. What is the result or the outcome that people get when they either buy your product or buy your service? So for me, they get a new brand, they become a magnet for clients, they scale their business, they increase demand for their brand. So what are the emotional and tangible benefits that somebody gets in exchange for their hard-earned cash that they're giving you for this product? And then what are some of the emotions that either they're going to experience during this process or at the end? So for me, those are words like clarity, confidence, empowered, ready. And then we start to get fun. So I have 2 columns, one for each of your 2 archetypes. So if you've been in my orbit for any length of time, I'm obsessed with brand archetypes. They're an incredibly useful tool, particularly when it comes to naming. So I have the 1 archetype, 2 archetypes. I typically recommend that people focus on a primary and a secondary. And if you want a shortcut to figuring out what to fill these columns in with, inside of my brand fluency archetype courses, there's 1 course for each of the 12 different archetypes. There's actually a spreadsheet that includes over 200 words that are specific to each archetype. But I take my own knowledge. You can use your intuition. You can use what is available, all of the free content that's available in terms of archetypes on my website to help inform your brainstorm here. But my first archetype is sage, so words like code, genius, lab, equation all fit that personality. And then for magician, things like alchemy or influence, your inner self or inner power, and then transmute are all really fun words that fall under that archetype. And then this one is hit or miss for me, but sometimes you can come up with some really great names by altering well-known phrases or say puns to fit your brand. So you can start to think of if there's any commonly held phrases or isms that you think might have something to do with your brand. So the ones that I was thinking about are just the phrase brand new, which is one that I actually used in my course name, brand new brand. The idea of getting fluent in a language is interesting. Cast a spell, like make people fall in love with you. Love potion. So it's just kind of this random collection of phrases you could think about, like song titles, puns, just cliches, isms, different things like that, that you could maybe tweak one of the words to make it unique to you and use that as the basis of your name. And then use these add-ons here in this column here with caution. Whenever we're making up a name, it has 2 sides of it. So on one hand, it's great because it's going to be a made-up word that you own. But then on the other hand, it can be a little bit groan-worthy, like it can seem a little bit cheesy if you're not careful. Or it could be hard for people to say or to spell if you're making up names. But you could potentially use add-ons. So it could be like, I'm a brandologist or something of that nature, or brand fest, like if we're having a party. So you could use some of these add-ons with one of your core names or core words and come up with a new name. And then we have a remix column all the way over at the right. So what we do is we just pull things together. So here's some examples from my brand. So clarity code, demand lab, brand new brand, brand fluency, brandology, influency. Like you start to come up with as many different options as possible that sound like a good name for you. And then at that point, the final step is to go see what's available. So which ones of these lists do you like the best? And then what's going to be available in terms of an acceptable URL, social media, available in the market, so not being used by somebody else that's a close competitor, those kinds of things. So that is my process, and here are some of the tools that I use to generate more ideas. So one of them is Onim, so it's guide.onim.co that you can see here on the screen. And they have tons of links to other websites that you can use, both dictionaries, thesauruses, other languages, word generators. Like they have compiled the mecca of branding resources. So definitely check them out. And I'm going to share a few of my favorite ones that I've discovered along the way. So some of them might be duplicated here in Putnam, probably, since it's so comprehensive, but these are the ones that I've found most helpful myself. First one is lean domain search. So particularly when I'm, say, like naming a brand that we want to have a really clear and great URL for, or if I'm naming, say, like a webinar or a product that I want to be able to just give them a quick .com website URL to find, we can start by adding a word or two here in the search and then see what lean domains are available. So for example, if I put in branding, you get a bunch of ideas that all have the .com available. So branding finder, track branding, branding price, branding, view branding, branding air, branding friend. So you're gonna wanna filter these by what's actually true for your brand, obviously, or that are on brand for your personality, but it can be a really great resource to find something that is actually going to be available. Similarly, Panaby is interesting. So let's just say brand and magnet. So you typically put in 2 words and then it'll start to remix and tell you which ones actually have the .com available. This one's been hit or miss lately. I haven't found any great ones, but it used to be more useful for me earlier, so I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it. So like mybrandmagnet.com is available. So there, it identified that for me nice and quickly. You could also look at wordoid.com, which is a fancy name for made up words. They have a few different languages, and then you can look and you can also filter by which ones are available for the .com. You could find things that kind of sound like a sass or something interesting. So let me see if I can find anything worth mentioning. Incomebody.com is available apparently. Unhurts.com. That could be something interesting. Bambacy.com. Some of them are just terrible, right? You just wouldn't use them because they don't work. And you obviously have better answers if you show all of them, because you get anything that maybe you're gonna use like a .co or a .io or some other URL to register your name. Next, one-word.domains. This one's a fun one too, just for thinking of ideas that you wouldn't have thought of yourself. So it gives you several different URLs like annual.ai, carefree.ai, amuse.co, which apparently is a premium domain, which means it's more than the $11 or whatever, amend.to, ultracrisp.co, all sorts of interesting speakable brand names. So you could use this as a tool as well. And then the One Look dictionary is incredible. So using this to find synonyms, to find some of those isms or cliches or idioms that you could turn into a brand name. What's cool about it is you can find words that are related to a concept. So the one that they give an example to is if you use the asterisk winter sport, it'll find words that are related to that concept. So things like luge, skating, skiing, biathlon, bobsleigh, curling, cold, slalom, like all sorts of interesting related names that you could use instead of the most obvious thing. So wouldn't it be cool to have like a winter sportswear gear brand that was named something like anorak or slalom? Super cool, and it can give you some really great options there. And then lastly, the good old thesaurus.com. I use this thesaurus extensively when I'm naming brands. So don't overlook the obvious when you're creating this brainstorm of possible brand names. All right, amazing humans, that is all that I have for you. Happy naming. Go out there. I can't wait share in the comments, what is the brand name that you secured, or product name, or newsletter name, or webinar name that you created using this process? I would love to celebrate you in the comments. If you found this helpful and you are so inclined, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my future branding videos.